Jihad is the executive director of the Jericho Movement, which is a coalition member. And it's an important organization that has long advocated for the freedom of political prisoners and prisoners of war in this country, and to even acknowledge that such people exist. We're really honored to have you join us.
Thank you, sister. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Very good. I am sorry I cannot be with you. I kind of wanted to, but as we say, Allah is the best of planners. Coming in from the Sudan, which is connected to our work, and just got in later than I thought yesterday to make my travels today a problem. So I start off with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, and thanking the Coalition for Civil Freedom for giving me the opportunity to present. I did get a chance to hear what my dear brother just now mentioned ahead of me. I was listening. Very good points, and I want to kind of start my presentation as it relates to U.S. political prisoners in the United States specifically, and the impact of the counterintelligence program, which my dear brother ahead of me was speaking about. And so starting from that point on, with the continuity of this conversation, I would say being aware of the law is essential to what we're doing, to know what the restrictions are, but also knowing those restrictions does not necessarily mean that we are bounded by them. Because if the law says something and the law is repressive, then we have to strategically go about making those changes. And one just off the cuff example, it used to be the law that Black people couldn't drink from the same water fountain, or desegregated law counter. So segregated law count, lunch counter, excuse me. So it took civil disobedience in breaking the law to change that. It took civil disobedience and breaking the law to change a lot of laws. So there are layers of strategies that we need to fully embrace, legally, politically, social activism. So I just wanted to say that I thank my dear brother for bringing that and making us understand the importance of knowing what it is. I'm formerly a member of the Black Panther Party. I was a political prisoner for about 23 years in the United States, prisoner of war, because my actions were actually committed in the defense of freedom of Black, brown, and indigenous people, specifically in the securing of land, which is part of the struggles of the 60s and 70s. And I mentioned that so that we can be proud of those struggles, even though they've criminalized us. But there are different types of political prisons. Everybody's a political prisoner in a sense in the United States, in many countries around the world where there's a racist and justice system. So even street crimes, in a sense, are politically adjudicated by virtue of the conditions that the government and the status quo has established over centuries, that we fall victim to, and that we become gullible to, and become complicit in, and we commit crimes against each other. And as a result of that, we are convicted, in a system that is racism, but it's a system that created these conditions over time that we fall to our own devices. But that's another story. But for us, the political prisoners, as we know, prisoners that have taken a stand consciously against human rights abuses, against racism, against exploitation, against social degradation, regardless if you've taken an action, a street action, a protest action, and in some cases in the past, paramilitary action. So we, in the Jericho Movement, which I am the chairperson of, we recognize the whole gambit of these political prisoners. We don't use the word prisoner of war because anymore as a strategic, it's just strategic because the United States narrative is that there are no political prisoners in the United States. There's only political prisoners in other countries. And the United States is good at pointing their finger, charging this, doing that. And but when it comes to itself, it just negates the fact that there are. And the narrative is so profound that when any one of us becomes incarcerated because of our politics, because we're set up or framed, falsely accused, or in the midst of an active demonstration or committed an action, that the United States is very easy for them to criminalize us by taking us through this judicial process, that if you're duly convicted of a crime, then you are a criminal. And so that is the narrative blended in with street crimes and all other type of things. And as far as the American public is concerned, it's just a confusing mess. But here you are, you're charged with killing a cop, you're charged with demonstrating, you're charged with sending money to terrorist organizations. All of that becomes part of this criminality because of the result of going through the so-called just judicial system here in the United States. So we don't say prisoners of war, because that would just make trying to explain to the fact of American people that there are political prisoners. You're adding this other component there. So we just say political prisoners. And then when somebody wants to delve into the details, then we can start categorizing that. But just in terms of the educational process, we say political prisoners. And if you want to know more, if a person is actively involved in doing more, they can begin to sift out the different categories of what's going on with people like that. So I just wanted to say, with the time that I have, there's layers of strategies. The counterintelligence program is real. And as my dear brother before me said, by any other name. So, you know, this Senator Church hearings back in the 70s deemed the COINTELPRO, FBI's counterintelligence program, as being illegal. But after that, saying that, nothing was done. Prisoners that were subjected to that program, set up, framed, or otherwise, they weren't freed. There was no punitive action set. It just was declared as illegal. So back down, change their focus, change their position, and call it something else. It's much more dangerous today in the sense that that something else now is legal. So back earlier in the 60s and 70s, Senator Church, Frank Church was his name, had those hearings on the counterintelligence program. They viewed those actions to be illegal. Now those same actions are legal, setting up a surveillance, violation of constitutional rights. This is hard to prove, especially when they throw in the boogeyman word, terrorism. Like it's, oh my God, we have to do everything, even though the pretenses are false like that. So we have a lot of work. So the strategy has to be legal. One good announcement I had two, was that Dr. Mutulu Shakur was granted parole. If you're not aware of that, he is a freedom fighter that's been in prison well over 30-something years now. He's dying of 4-stage bone marrow cancer, and the parole board released him back in May. The medical community determined that he had 6 months to live. And so May, June, July, August, September, October, November, that means he'll be dying this month accordingly, like that. So now on his deathbed, they granted him parole, and they denied him parole 10 times when he was qualified to be on parole. So, you know, the qualification of parole is not to revisit the original crime, but to see what once the parameters of what the judge has sentenced you to have been met. Once they have been met, then after that, the parole decision should be predicated on your prison adjustment. Did you get any infractions? Do you pose now a risk for the community? Those things. It's not to say, well, you did this. You did this was adjudicated by the judge. But nevertheless, what my dear brother before me said, how they use language against us. One of the denials is, for an example, Mutulu being denied parole, believe it or not, was him writing letters. And I have quite a few that I've received from him. He's my comrade. I've done time with him in prison, writing me and others letters and signing it stiff resistance. Whatever he's talking about, your family and this and that, his education, what he's doing in prison, then he signs the letter, stiff resistance. They actually said that this shows that you are of a mentality that's dangerous and that you are a risk to the community. So I hope you hear what I'm saying. So that just shows you the extent that they would go through to utilize our language against us. But in spite of that, sisters and brothers, I will say this, that we cannot allow that. We have to be conscious of what we do, strategic, and be wise in what we say, but we cannot be cowered into a position. I just came back from South Sudan, which is Africa's newest nation. You know, the conflict between the North and the South, and Muslims and the Christians, but mostly it was political conflict. I don't know the details to even talk about, nor would I on this platform, but the new country was the division of Southern Sudan. And there was a wonderful conference that I was invited to, that they had movement representatives from many countries: Uganda, South Africa, Tanzania, Palestine, Tibet, West Sahara, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I'm just trying to remember some, Liberia, Cameroon, Puerto Rico, West Papua, the Basque Country in Spain, and I'm probably missing some more, of course, the United States, which I was representing with Matt Meyer. But the purpose of that is to establish, and I'm saying this for my last comment with you, sisters and brothers, the purpose of that conference was to look at the local and regional organizing for peace, including the campaigning to free their political prisoners in different countries. So number one, we all acknowledge the importance of us as organizations, including the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, the National Jericho Movement, and any other organization that you may be a part of, to fortifying and strengthening your own infrastructure and your capabilities, number one. Number two is to begin to consciously and intentionally network with sister organizations in your region, in your area, in this case, the United States. This is very important when I say intentionally, because we cannot do this alone. And number three, the biggest thing happening at this conference with all these different representations, to form an international network to support political prisoners, sharing resources, letters of support, if it's depending what countries is going through, that type of representation, just like they have the European Union, they have all the African unions and all this, but and all these right-wing associations that are international, we need to form this solid international community recognized as an organization of support and sharing amongst ourselves. So this was a major push for that type of initiative. And quite naturally, once it is formulated more on this side of the water, I will be presenting that to my sisters and brothers in the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, because I think we should all become part of that network and sharing resources, because the world is becoming an increasingly smaller place and we really need each other in ways that we can. So back to the layered strategy, that's one of them. These coalition building, intentionally coalition buildings, and developing the infrastructure to do that. And number two is looking at it on an international level. And when it comes down to actually freeing a political prisoner, the education, the protest rallies, the seminars, the conferences are very important to educate people, loop them into what's going on and get us all situated. But the actual liberation on the tip of that spear, on the tip of that strategy, there has to be conscious lawyers doing that type of work, lawyers that are connected with the movements that are supporting these sisters and brothers, you know, because the legal thing is what's going to go through the eye of that needle. Your protest is not necessarily is going to cause a governor or a president or anybody else to release anybody, even though it's very important, because this protest, it brings community awareness. It puts us in contact with other resources. Those other resources work together. But at the end of it all, if you can see what I'm doing with my hands, all this activity, which is very important, education, community protests, lobbying, all these type of things, when it gets down to it, there has to be one or two people, more than likely lawyers, you know, that's going to take all of this work and initiative, frame it in a legal context so that we can have that type of representative, that type of person in front of us to issue the demand, to file that petition, commutation of sentence, to take that to the government, to do this type of thing. So it has to be a very smooth operation. Matula getting out was a result of his defense committee, which Jericho was a part of, but the lawyers at the tip of that spear doing that real legal work, that has not, so all of this working together with all the other political prisoners too. So I guess my main message in closing, sisters and brothers, unless there's some questions, of course, whatever the format is, I'm here for the duration. But as my brother said before me, and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, my dear brother, so love and respect to you for sure. but being aware of the law, being strategic and very wise in what we do, very conscious and intentional in what we do, and finding a way. And I'm saying this to each and every one of you listening. You have to look within yourself and ground yourself, center yourself, check your heart to make sure that you are really at peace with what you're doing, and that we are challenging a very formidable opponent, one that has incarcerated and in prison and our loved ones and our relatives, and one that is responsible for the exploitation and oppression of people, particularly people of color in this country, for centuries. An entity that has destabilized governments. The CIA, is one part of my South Sudanese presentation, is responsible for over 5,000 covert operations to destabilize countries around the world over the last several decades. 5,000. This is not a Jason Bourne movie. This is real. What happens to us, and we are the vanguard. We collectively on the human rights movement to make sure that the world does not just go to hell in a handbasket, as they say. So our work not only freeing political prisoners, but it deals with our own humanity, and to make sure that anybody amongst us today that's arrested and incarcerated, falsely accused, knows that they will not be left behind, knows that there's a network behind them that will do the best we can to make sure that they're as safe as possible in prison, that they have food, that they have support, that they have visitation, and by all means that there's a legal strategy in the works all of the time to free them. And we will not be cowed or intimidated by counterintelligence maneuvers. We'll be aware of them. We'll be robust to stand against them. We'll ask Allah for whatever you believe in, for fortitude and strength. And as Matulu, I told Matulu before he had the parole date that whatever happens, and you can tell your relatives that if anybody knows brothers and sisters in prison, you can fortify them with these type of messages also. That we say, man plans and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. That the message that you give back to your supporters is one of resilience and strength, even though you may be going through hell. And I pray I would be able to do the same thing, Allah forbid, if I'm ever in that situation again, to represent what I'm telling you. It's very important that our sisters and brothers that are in prison get the message from us to remain strong, to send statements of resilience to the people, because we don't want the victory to be on the side of the government, so that they defeated us in any way to have, oh, woe is me, oh my God, look what's happening. None of that, even though we may be suffering and feeling that pain periodically, as understandably so, we cannot present that. This is a very serious struggle. It's a struggle for humanity. And our struggle cannot take on any complexion of woe is me. If you died there, and this is not to sound insensitive, that's where you die. And you look back on your history and you see how many gallant sisters and brothers throughout time have given their life and sacrifice. And what do we do with them right now? We uphold their legacy. You cannot escape that reality of dying. It's how and what we've given in our life. So Allah forbid any of us are in this position. So I'm asking you right now to make sure that you ground yourself, and that you gird yourself by prayer and fasting or whatever you do on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're centered and grounded and realize that what we're up against is formidable, and we have so many opportunities to challenge and change it. So I'm going to end there, and I thank you, Sister Leana, and everybody else for inviting me. I'm going to stand by for any questions. I may blank my screen out, so I won't be a distraction drinking my coffee and stuff like that. But I'll be right here. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.